I knew something was wrong the second I saw Emma's phone light up. It wasn't just a text, it was the text, the kind that changes everything. I was sitting on the couch, minding my own business, when her phone, which she usually kept glued to her side, buzzed on the kitchen counter. "Can you pick up some wine for tonight? I'll bring the same hotel key as last time. Can't wait." The words might as well have been a bullet straight through me. My mind went blank for a second. I could hear the sound of my own breathing, loud, heavy, almost like I was underwater. This was it. This was what I'd been feeling for months, the late nights at work, the sudden interest in her appearance, the way she had all but stopped caring about us. I didn't even need to read it again. I put the phone down, careful not to make a sound. My stomach tightened like I'd been sucker punched, but I knew better than to lose it right there. She was upstairs, probably getting ready for whatever excuse she'd give me later. I had to stay calm. There was no way I'd let her know what I just saw. Not yet. I'd always pictured what I'd do in a situation like this, how I'd confront her, how I'd demand an explanation, maybe even get in her face about it. But sitting there in the silence of our living room, everything I thought I knew about myself, about us, suddenly felt fake. A marriage built on bullshit. And the kicker? I still didn't have the whole story. But I was damn well about to find out. I'm not the kind of guy who freaks out. I don't storm around, throw shit, or scream. But sitting there after reading that message, I felt my pulse start to race. My mouth went dry, my hands were cold, and for a second, I had no idea what to do next. It's weird when your mind starts to piece things together. Every little detail that seemed innocent before suddenly clicks into place, and you realize you've been played for a fool. The late nights, the distant looks, the phone that was always flipped screen down whenever she sat near me, it all pointed to one ugly truth. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd shared over a decade of my life with, was cheating on me. And not in some emotional, we've grown apart way. No. She had a guy, and they were meeting in hotels. This wasn't some fling she could brush off. This was a full-blown betrayal, and now I was sitting in the middle of it. But what the hell do you even do in that moment? I couldn't just confront her, not without proof. If I blew up now, she'd turn it around on me, say I was paranoid, accuse me of snooping on her phone. No, I needed to be smart about this. I needed to know everything before I made my move. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of the message, just in case she deleted it later. Then I put her phone back exactly where it was and acted like I hadn't seen a thing. Inside, though, I was crumbling. I felt the heat of anger rising in my chest, but I swallowed it down. I had to be calm. I had to play this right. I stood up, casually walking into the kitchen. She was still upstairs, probably getting ready to go out, but I couldn't hear her. Good. I had time. I knew she was meeting this guy tonight, I just didn't know where. But if I knew Emma, she'd leave some trail behind, something small but enough for me to figure out where they'd be. I opened her laptop. She used it for work, but sometimes she'd leave personal stuff open without thinking. Sure enough, her email was logged in. I clicked around for a bit, searching through the folders she didn't think to hide. It didn't take long to find the confirmation from the hotel. She had a room booked for later that night, the same hotel they'd stayed at last time, apparently. Room 317. That's all I needed. I wasn't stupid, I knew this was going to blow up, but not yet. I needed to catch her in the act. There would be no room for excuses or explanations. I was going to walk into that hotel room and rip the mask right off her face. But before that, I had to survive a couple more hours of pretending. Pretending that everything was fine, that I wasn't on the verge of losing it. I heard her footsteps coming down the stairs. I shut the laptop and leaned casually against the counter, trying to keep my expression neutral. She walked into the kitchen, dressed up like she was headed out for a night on the town, tight dress, makeup done to perfection. She looked good, too good for a regular evening out. That dress wasn't for me, it was for him. "Hey," she said, smiling like nothing was wrong, like she wasn't about to go and screw another man behind my back. "I'm heading out for a work thing. You don't mind, do you?" Work thing. Right. I played along. No problem. Have fun. She hesitated for a second, like she was testing me, trying to see if I was suspicious. I kept my face blank, casual. I even smiled, though it felt like I was stretching my skin too tight over a ticking bomb inside me. She leaned over, kissed me on the cheek, how fucking generous, and grabbed her purse. "Don't wait up," she said, her voice light and carefree, like she wasn't shattering everything between us with each step she took toward the door. The moment I heard the front door close, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The anger simmered in my gut, but I held it back. I wasn't going to waste my energy on smashing plates or punching walls. No, this was going to be a clean operation. I was going to catch her, make her see what she'd done, and leave her with nothing but regret. I went upstairs and got changed. Nothing fancy, just enough to blend in. I wasn't planning on making a scene at the hotel. I didn't care about yelling or making a public spectacle. I just wanted to see it with my own eyes. The confrontation could wait. I needed to burn the image of her with him into my mind so there'd be no way she could talk her way out of it later. I grabbed my keys and headed out. The hotel wasn't far, just a few miles from our house. How convenient for her. As I drove, my mind raced, running through every possible scenario. What if she saw me? What if I lost my nerve? What if I walked in and it wasn't what I thought it was? No. I couldn't let doubt creep in. I'd seen the message. I'd found the hotel confirmation. There was no mistake here. She was cheating. She was with someone else. When I pulled into the hotel parking lot, I sat there for a moment, staring up at the building. It was one of those mid-range places, clean but nothing fancy. Definitely not the kind of place she'd ever suggest we stay at. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. She'd probably been here with him more than once. And all that time, I was sitting at home, none the wiser. I stepped out of the car and walked into the lobby, keeping my head down. The clerk barely glanced at me as I walked by, and I was grateful for it. The elevator was slow, but I could feel my pulse in my ears as I rode it up to the third floor. Room 317. The door was just a few feet in front of me, and I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins. This was it. This was the moment I was going to see the truth laid bare. No more guessing, no more wondering. I'd finally know just how badly she'd betrayed me. I stood outside the door for what felt like hours, but it was probably just seconds. I could hear muffled voices from inside, her voice, and his. They were laughing. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my breathing steady. I had to stay calm. I wasn't here to beat the shit out of anyone, not yet, anyway. I knocked. The laughter stopped. For a moment, there was dead silence. I imagined them both frozen in place, hearts racing, wondering who could be knocking at this hour. Then I heard her voice, strained and tense. "Who is it?" I didn't answer. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps, then the sound of the door unlocking. The door opened just a crack, and her face appeared, pale and shocked. "David, what are you doing here?" I didn't say a word. I just pushed the door open the rest of the way. And there he was. Some guy, younger than me by a few years, standing by the bed, shirtless, scrambling to pull his pants on. He looked at me like a deer caught in headlights, panicked and guilty as hell. Emma stood there, frozen, her face turning from shock to terror. She knew. She knew there was no talking her way out of this. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, locking it with a quiet click. "So," I said, my voice low, steady, cold. "This is what you've been doing. This is where you've been going." She didn't answer, her lips trembling as she stared at me. The guy, still fumbling with his belt, looked like he wanted to crawl under the bed and disappear. I didn't care about him. My eyes were on her, on Emma, the woman I had loved and trusted for over a decade. The woman who had just blown up my life. And now, I was going to make her face the wreckage. I closed the door behind me slowly, the soft click of the lock sounding a lot louder in the silence that had taken over the room. Emma didn't move. She just stood there, her face pale, eyes wide, mouth slightly open as if she was still processing the fact that I was standing right in front of her, in the middle of the hotel room she'd probably shared with him before. Her guy, was still fumbling with his pants, his face turning beet red, as if he wasn't sure whether he should run or try to reason with me. I didn't care what he did. He was just a bonus target. This was between me and Emma. David. I can explain, she stammered, her voice shaky, her eyes darting between me and the guy behind her. She was trying to read me, trying to gauge how I was going to react. She must have known that excuses were pointless, but I could see her brain working, searching for something, anything, that might soften the blow. Explain? I said quietly, taking a step closer to her. My voice was calm, which even surprised me. My fists were clenched, my body rigid, but I wasn't going to yell, not yet. I wasn't going to lose control. Not before I got to hear what kind of garbage she was about to spew. All right, Emma. Go ahead. Explain to me why you're in a hotel room with him. Her eyes flicked over to the guy again, and I turned to face him for the first time, really looking at him. He couldn't have been more than 30, maybe younger. Dark hair, lean build, standing awkwardly by the bed with his shirt half on, half off, as if he wasn't sure if he should finish getting dressed or not. Pathetic. And who the hell are you? I asked, my voice low and controlled, but every word felt like it was laced with venom. You know she's married, right? Or is that part of the appeal? The guy looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't get the words out. Instead, he gave a half-assed shrug, like that would make him look less guilty. Get the fuck out, I said to him, not even bothering to raise my voice. He didn't argue, didn't look at Emma, didn't even try to pretend like he had a right to be there. He just grabbed his shirt, pulled on his shoes, and practically ran out the door. I didn't bother looking back at him. I knew he wasn't going to be a problem. Emma stood there, silent, her eyes filled with panic. She was holding on to the edge of the bedpost like it might keep her grounded, keep her from collapsing under the weight of what was happening. She knew she was cornered. So, let's hear it, I said again, leaning against the wall, folding my arms over my chest. Tell me what the hell is going on here, Emma. I want to hear your version of it. I'm dying to know. She swallowed hard, her throat working as she tried to gather herself. It's not what you think, she said weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. Not what I think. Really? I laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was the kind that felt like it might choke me. So I didn't just catch you in a hotel room with another man, someone who definitely isn't your husband? That didn't happen, right? This is just a misunderstanding? No, it's not that. I mean, yes, but... I can explain, she blurted out, the panic creeping into her voice now. She was backpedaling, scrambling to find a way to make this sound less horrible than it was, but every word out of her mouth just made it worse. David, please. I never meant for this to happen. I laughed again, harsher this time. You never meant for this to happen? I repeated. What the hell does that even mean, Emma? Did you just trip and fall into his bed? How the hell do you not mean to screw another guy behind my back? She winced, tears starting to fill her eyes, but I didn't care. Not this time. Her tears used to break me down, used to make me feel like I needed to fix whatever was wrong. Not anymore. Now, they just made me angrier. I've been so lonely, David, she said, her voice cracking. You've been so busy with work, with everything else. I just felt like we weren't connected anymore. I didn't know how to fix it. And then he came along, and I don't know, it just happened. Her voice trailed off, and she looked at me, as if that explanation would somehow make sense. As if I'd hear her and say, oh, well, in that case, it's fine. You were lonely, and I was busy, so I guess this is all my fault. I stared at her, the coldness settling deeper inside me. You were lonely, I repeated. That's your excuse? You felt lonely, so you found some asshole to fill the void? And you think that justifies this? She flinched at the anger in my voice, but I wasn't done. Not even close. And how long has this been going on? I asked, my jaw tightening. How long have you been sneaking around behind my back? She bit her lip, hesitating, and that hesitation told me more than her words ever could. How long, Emma? I repeated, my voice rising just slightly. Don't lie to me. Don't make this worse than it already is. She looked down at the floor, her hands gripping the bedpost like she might fall without it. A few months, she whispered. A few months. I felt the blood drain from my face. All those nights when she'd said she was working late, all the times she'd come home smelling like a different perfume, all the moments when I told myself I was just being paranoid, it had all been true. Every single suspicion I'd buried, every doubt I'd ignored. I could feel the fury building inside me, a tidal wave of betrayal threatening to spill over. A few months? I repeated, taking a step toward her. So all this time, you've been playing house with me while screwing some guy on the side? Is that it? She was crying now, real tears, but I didn't care. David, please, she sobbed. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't plan this. It just happened, right? I interrupted, my voice icy. Yeah, I heard you the first time. It just happened. Like you had no control over it, like you weren't making a choice every single time you walked into that hotel room with him. She shook her head, her face crumpling. I still love you, she choked out. I do, I swear. This was a mistake. A horrible mistake, but I love you, David. Please believe me. I stared at her, the woman I had once trusted more than anyone else in the world, and felt nothing but cold, hard anger. You love me? I asked, incredulous. You love me, and this is how you show it? By screwing another guy behind my back for months? By lying to my face every day? That's love, Emma? She didn't answer. She just stood there, sobbing, her face buried in her hands, as if crying would make any of this better. As if her tears could undo the months of betrayal, the lies, the deceit. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I needed to get out of there before I did something I'd regret. I wasn't going to let her tears manipulate me, not this time. She'd already played that game too many times. You don't get to play the victim here, I said quietly, my voice cold and hard. You did this. You lied to me. You cheated. And now you're standing there, crying, hoping I'll forgive you because you say you're sorry? Because you didn't mean for it to happen? That's not how this works. She didn't say anything, just kept crying, and I realized I couldn't stand to be in the same room with her anymore. I had to leave before I lost control completely. I turned and headed for the door, grabbing the handle with so much force it felt like it might break off in my hand. I needed to get out of there, get away from her, before I said or did something I couldn't take back. But just as I was about to walk out, she spoke again, her voice small and broken. Please, David, don't go. We can fix this. I'll do anything, I swear. Just don't leave me. I need you. I stopped, my hand on the door. I stood there for a second, frozen, as her words hung in the air. And then I turned around, looking her straight in the eyes. You needed me? I asked, my voice cold. When? When you were meeting him here? When you were lying to me every night? You didn't need me then, Emma. You needed him. Don't try to guilt me now because you got caught. You made your bed, and now you get to lie in it. Her face crumpled again, and I felt a strange satisfaction seeing her like this, broken and desperate, just like she'd left me. You want to fix this? I asked, my voice sharp. You think this is something we can just fix? You think I can just forget about what you've done? She didn't answer, just sobbed harder, and I shook my head. You ruined everything, Emma, I said quietly. You threw it all away for what? For some guy who'll probably disappear now that it's out in the open? Was it worth it? I didn't wait for an answer. I didn't care anymore. I opened the door and walked out, letting it slam shut behind me, the sound echoing through the hallway. I didn't stop walking until I was out of the hotel and in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had no idea where I was going or what I was going to do next. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going back to her. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. I drove aimlessly after leaving the hotel. My mind was in overdrive, replaying the scene again and again, my hands clenching and unclenching the steering wheel as if I could somehow strangle the rage inside me. Emma, the woman I devoted so many years of my life to, had tossed it all aside like it meant nothing. And for what? A few nights in a cheap hotel room with some idiot who probably had no idea what he was messing with. I wasn't going home, not yet. The thought of walking back into that house, with all our shared memories plastered on the walls, made me sick to my stomach. Every corner of it would scream her betrayal at me, and I wasn't ready to face that. I parked the car in an empty lot somewhere near the edge of town. I just sat there, staring out the windshield, the reality of it all sinking in. I'd caught her. I'd confronted her. She had no excuses left. But that wasn't enough. I wasn't done yet. The anger inside me wasn't going to let me walk away quietly, not after everything she'd done. She had to pay. I thought about all the options swirling around in my head. I could go home, pack her things, and throw them out on the lawn. I could change the locks, toss out all her clothes, burn her shit for all I cared. But those ideas felt weak. Too easy. Too predictable. She'd get off on the sympathy from neighbors, playing the victim, crying about how I lost my temper and overreacted. No, I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of playing that card. I needed something better. Something that would rip her life apart, just like she had done to mine. She needed to feel what it was like to have everything she thought she had, everything she'd taken for granted, crumble right in front of her. And I knew exactly where to start. I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through the contacts. I wasn't going to call Emma. I was going to call someone who mattered more to her than I ever did. Her boss. Emma worked at a marketing firm. She'd always talked about how much she loved the job, how she was climbing the ladder, making a name for herself. She'd mentioned her boss in passing, a woman named Karen who was as by the book as they come. No nonsense, strict, professional. The kind of person who wouldn't take kindly to one of her employees using company time for extracurricular activities, especially ones involving shady hotel rooms. I found Karen's number, pulled up from an old company party invitation that Emma had forwarded to me months ago. I stared at the screen for a moment, my thumb hovering over the call button. I knew this was going to nuke Emma's career. I knew this was crossing a line most people wouldn't even consider. But then I thought about all the nights I spent sitting at home, trusting her, supporting her, while she was out screwing some other guy. She deserved every bit of this. I hit the call button and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. It rang twice before a clipped, no-nonsense voice answered. Hello, this is Karen. Hi, Karen, this is David, Emma's husband. We met briefly at the company Christmas party last year. There was a pause on the other end, probably as she tried to place me. Yes, I remember. How can I help you? I hate to bring this up, but I think you should know something about Emma, I said, keeping my voice calm, measured. I've just found out she's been using company time to meet up with someone she's been having an affair with. I thought you'd want to know, considering the company's reputation and all. Another pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. Are you saying this happened on company time? She asked, her voice suddenly sharper, more focused. Yes, I said. I just caught them at a hotel not far from her office. This has been going on for months. I'm sure you can check her work schedule, and you'll see how she's been taking liberties. Karen was silent for a long moment. I could tell she was pissed, and that's exactly what I wanted. Thank you for letting me know, she said finally, her tone cold as ice. This will be addressed immediately. Thank you, I said, barely able to hide the satisfaction in my voice. I thought it was the right thing to do. Goodbye, David, she said, and then the line went dead. I sat back in the car seat, feeling a surge of something that felt a lot like victory. That was the first domino. Emma loved her job. Hell, she was obsessed with it. Losing it would gut her in a way that even I couldn't. It was the one thing she thought she had control over, the one thing she valued more than anything else. And now, I'd taken that from her. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The next step was to make sure everyone in our lives knew exactly who she was and what she'd done. Our friends, our family, her family. They all needed to know. There would be no hiding behind her lies anymore. No playing the part of the perfect wife, the perfect friend. She'd made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it. I pulled up Facebook on my phone, scrolling through my friend list until I found her parents. Her mom, Jean, was one of those women who lived for appearances. She loved to show off how perfect her daughter's life was, always bragging about how well we were doing, how happy we were. I was about to shatter that image for her. I started typing out the message. Jean, I hate to have to tell you this, but Emma has been cheating on me for months. I caught her today at a hotel with another man. I thought you should know the truth. I read it over once, twice, and then I hit send. I didn't care how it made me look. I didn't care if they thought I was petty or bitter. I wanted the truth out there. I wanted them all to know that Emma wasn't the person they thought she was. Next, I went to the group chat I had with some of our mutual friends. These were people we'd spent holidays with, weekends, people who'd seen us as this rock-solid couple. They were going to know the truth too. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative. I just found out Emma's been cheating on me for months, I typed. I caught her with the guy today. Thought you should know. I hit send and watched as the little bubbles popped up, signaling that people were reading it. The responses came almost immediately. Oh my God, David, I'm so sorry. Jesus, are you okay? How could she do that? The sympathy was nice, but it wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was for them to turn on her. To see her for who she really was. The woman who had lied to all of us, who had taken everything we built and destroyed it for some cheap thrill. My phone buzzed, and I saw a notification from Jean. David, I don't know what to say. This can't be true. Please call me. I ignored it. I didn't want to hear her voice. I didn't want to hear any excuses or apologies. Jean could sit with the truth for a while. She could wrestle with the idea that her perfect daughter wasn't so perfect after all. I leaned back in the car, letting out a long breath. I felt lighter somehow, like the weight of the betrayal was starting to lift, replaced by the cold satisfaction of revenge. Emma had broken something in me, something I wasn't sure I'd ever get back. But now, I was breaking her world too. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Emma. Where are you? Please come home. We need to talk. I stared at the screen, my hand tightening around the phone. She was probably panicking now. She knew I wasn't coming back to the hotel. She knew she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But I wasn't going to rush back to her. Not yet. Let her sit with it. Let her squirm. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and started the car. I wasn't going home to her tonight. I wasn't ready to see her face again, to listen to more lies, more pleas for forgiveness. She could wait. I drove around for a while, not really paying attention to where I was going, just trying to let the adrenaline burn off. My mind kept replaying the scene from the hotel, her standing there, crying, asking me not to leave her. Part of me wondered if she was still sitting in that room, waiting for me to come back, hoping she could somehow talk her way out of this mess. She wouldn't be able to. Eventually, I pulled into a gas station and parked. I wasn't ready to go home, but I needed to clear my head. I stepped out of the car, the cool night air hitting me like a slap in the face, and walked toward the convenience store. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights made everything feel surreal. The cashier didn't even glance up as I walked in, just kept flipping through his magazine, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and headed to the counter, trying to focus on anything other than the mess that was my life. The cashier rang me up without a word, and I handed him a crumpled bill, my thoughts still spinning. As I walked back to the car, I glanced at my phone again. Another text from Emma. David, please. We need to fix this. I'll do anything. Just come home. I deleted the message without reading the rest. There was no fixing this. Not anymore. And I wasn't done yet. I sat in the car for a while after leaving the gas station, trying to figure out my next move. Revenge on Emma was in motion. Her boss was going to make sure her career hit a wall, her family and friends now knew she was a cheater, and the fallout from that alone was going to wreck her life. But the bastard she'd been screwing behind my back, he wasn't getting off that easy either. He needed to pay just as much, maybe more. The more I thought about him, the angrier I got. I didn't even know his name, but that didn't matter. He was just another guy who thought it was okay to screw around with someone else's wife. No consequences. No respect. He probably figured he could get away with it because he wasn't the one married. Just some random fling with a married woman, a fun little distraction for him, but something that ruined my life. I wasn't going to let him walk away from this. Not without feeling the heat. I started driving again, back toward the hotel. I didn't know if he'd be there, but it was the only lead I had. I knew his face. I knew the type. Young, arrogant, full of himself. He probably thought he was slick, sneaking around with a married woman. Guys like him always thought they were untouchable, that they could do whatever they wanted and there'd be no fallout. Well, tonight he was going to learn differently. The drive felt quicker this time. I parked in the same lot and walked inside, ignoring the clerk at the front desk who glanced up but didn't bother to say anything. Room 317 was the target, but I wasn't going there yet. Instead, I waited in the hallway outside, leaning against the wall, my mind replaying the scene from earlier. The way he looked at me when I walked into the room, like a scared little kid caught doing something wrong. He hadn't even tried to talk his way out of it. He just ran. I checked my phone, debating whether I should call Emma and see if she was still in the room, but I quickly tossed the idea aside. I didn't want to hear her voice. The rage was burning too hot, and hearing her would just push me closer to snapping. I needed to stay focused on the task at hand, finding that guy and making sure he knew what he'd stepped into. 20 minutes passed. 30. I was about to give up when I heard the door to room 317 click open. My heart raced as I watched the door swing wide, and there he was, walking out like he didn't have a care in the world, his phone in his hand, checking something like he was completely unaware of the storm coming his way. I pushed off the wall and started walking toward him, my steps slow and deliberate. He didn't notice me at first, too focused on his phone, but when he finally looked up and saw me, his expression shifted. First, confusion, then recognition, and finally, that same deer-in-the-headlights look I'd seen in the hotel room. He froze for a second, but then he started walking faster, like he could somehow avoid me if he just got to the elevator in time. Too bad for him, I wasn't in the mood for games. Hey! I called out, my voice sharp and cutting through the quiet hallway. We're not done yet. He turned to look at me, his face pale as he backed toward the elevator. He didn't respond, didn't say a word, just kept backing up, as if he thought putting distance between us would change anything. It wouldn't. I took a few more steps forward, closing the gap between us. What's the matter? No smartass comments this time? The doors to the elevator dinged open, and he practically dove inside, jamming the button for the lobby, his hand shaking as he did. But I was already there, stepping into the elevator with him just as the doors began to close. We stood there, just the two of us, the tension thick in the small space. He had nowhere to go now. Who the hell do you think you are? I said, my voice low but heavy with anger. You think you can just sleep with someone else's wife and walk away like nothing happened? He finally looked up at me, his face flushed, but still he didn't say anything. He was scared, and I wanted him to be. But I didn't want him to think this was going to be over with a few words or an apology. I wanted him to understand that he'd crossed a line. You knew she was married, didn't you? I asked, taking a step closer to him. You knew, and you didn't care. Did you even stop for a second to think about what you were doing? Or were you too busy getting what you wanted? He swallowed hard, and finally, he spoke. Look, man, I'm sorry. I didn't. I cut him off. Sorry? You think that makes any difference? You think you saying sorry is going to fix this? He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't let him. I took another step closer, getting right in his face, my hands twitching at my sides. You don't get to be sorry. You don't get to walk away from this like it didn't happen. I didn't mean to. I don't give a damn what you meant, I said, my voice rising now, my control starting to slip. You knew she was married, and you did it anyway. You didn't care about the damage you were doing, the life you were wrecking. All you cared about was getting what you wanted. He tried to back up, but there was nowhere for him to go. He was pressed against the wall of the elevator now, his eyes wide, panic clear on his face. I'm sorry, man. I swear, I didn't mean to get involved like this. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Didn't mean to? You did get involved. You chose this. You made this mess, and now you're going to deal with the fallout. The elevator dinged as it reached the lobby, and the doors slid open. He made a move to step out, but I grabbed his arm, holding him in place. He flinched, his eyes darting around the empty lobby, like he was hoping someone would come by and save him. But there was no one. Just me and him. I pulled him back into the elevator and hit the button for the parking garage. If he thought he was getting away, he was about to learn otherwise. As the elevator descended, I leaned in close, lowering my voice. You ruined my life. And now, I'm going to make sure yours falls apart too. You think this ends here? You think I'm just going to let you walk away? He didn't respond, his breathing fast and shallow, his hands trembling at his sides. I could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that he was in way over his head. He thought this was just some fling, some fun on the side. He didn't expect the husband to show up, didn't expect the consequences to catch up to him. The elevator doors opened into the dimly lit parking garage, and I shoved him forward, forcing him out of the elevator. He stumbled, catching himself on a concrete pillar, and turned to face me, his eyes wide with fear. Look, man, please, he said, his voice shaking. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't know it would go this far. I stepped toward him, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. You knew she was married. You knew what you were doing, and you didn't care. You thought you could screw around and get away with it. He flinched, his back pressed against the pillar, his eyes darting around the garage, looking for an escape. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I swear. I took another step closer, towering over him. You didn't mean to hurt anyone? Well, guess what? You did. You wrecked everything. And now, you're going to pay for it. I wanted to hit him. God, I wanted to break his face, to feel his bones crack under my fists. But something held me back. Maybe it was the thought of how much further this could go, how much worse it could get if I lost control completely. I wanted to ruin him, but not in a way that would put me behind bars. No, this had to be smarter. I grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and pulled him close, my face inches from his. You're going to regret ever touching her, I growled. Because I'm going to make sure this ruins you. I let go of him, shoving him back against the pillar. He stumbled, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he stared at me, wide-eyed and terrified. He knew now. He knew this wasn't over. I turned and walked away, leaving him there in the garage, his life dangling by a thread. But I wasn't finished with him. Not yet. As I drove away, the adrenaline still pumping through me, I started making plans. I was going to find out everything about this guy. His job, his family, his friends. I was going to make sure he couldn't escape the mess he'd made. I was going to tear down his life, just like he'd torn down mine. And when I was done, he'd wish he'd never laid eyes on Emma. I spent the night driving, mostly aimlessly, thinking about everything that had happened and what was coming next. My mind kept going back to Emma, to the guy, to the mess that was now my life. By the time I pulled into our driveway the next morning, the sun was just starting to rise. The house looked different, like it belonged to someone else. Maybe it always had. I didn't feel like it was home anymore. I got out of the car and stood there for a moment, staring at the door, knowing what was waiting for me inside. Emma had sent more texts through the night, begging me to come back, saying she was sorry, asking for a chance to explain. I'd ignored all of them. I didn't need to hear more excuses. She'd said enough already. But now, I had to go in. I had to face her one last time, have the conversation that would end whatever was left of us. There was no fixing this, no matter what she thought. She'd destroyed everything. All I could do now was sweep up the pieces and move on. I opened the door and stepped inside. The house was quiet, the air thick with the kind of tension you could feel. I walked into the living room, half expecting her to be curled up on the couch, waiting for me, but the room was empty. "David?" Her voice came from the kitchen, soft, tentative, like she wasn't sure how I'd respond. I turned and saw her standing in the doorway, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked like she hadn't slept. Good. I was glad. I didn't want her to sleep easy after what she'd done. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice shaking a little. She was trying to keep it together, but I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of losing everything. Too late for that. I nodded, though I didn't really want to. This conversation wasn't for me. I already knew how this was going to end. It was for her, so she could finally hear the truth she'd been avoiding for months. She sat down at the kitchen table, and I followed, taking the seat across from her. For a moment, neither of us said anything. She just stared at the table, her hands trembling in her lap. I waited, letting her stew in the silence, letting her feel the weight of what was coming. "David, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for any of this to happen." There it was again, never meant. Like that made it better, like that excused everything. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my voice calm. "You keep saying that," I said, my tone colder than I intended. "You never meant for it to happen, but it did. 4 months. You didn't mean to lie to me every day? Didn't mean to sneak around with that guy while I was sitting at home thinking everything was fine?" She winced at my words, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I was lonely, David. We'd grown apart. I didn't know how to talk to you about it. It just happened." "You were lonely?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "You didn't know how to talk to me? That's your excuse? So instead of telling me how you felt, you went and fucked someone else? You really think that justifies what you did?" Her shoulders shook as she started to cry again, but I didn't care. I wasn't here for her tears. She'd had plenty of chances to fix things, to talk to me, to be honest. Instead, she'd taken the coward's way out. "David, please," she sobbed. "I never stopped loving you. I know I made a mistake, but I don't want to lose you. I'll do anything. I swear. Just give me a chance to fix this." I stared at her, feeling a strange mix of disgust and pity. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to yell and break something, but that would give her more power than she deserved. She didn't deserve my anger anymore. She wasn't worth it. "You want a chance to fix this?" I said quietly. "Emma, there's nothing to fix. You broke it. You broke us." She shook her head, wiping her tears away with trembling hands. "No, we can fix it. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll quit my job. I'll cut off contact with him. We can go to therapy, work through this. I'll make it up to you, I swear." I leaned back in my chair, staring at her, trying to wrap my head around how she could still think this was salvageable. "You really think this is something we can just work through?" I asked. "Like it's a bump in the road? You've been cheating on me for months, Emma. Months. You didn't just make a mistake, you made a choice. Over and over again. And now you want me to believe you're sorry?" "I am sorry," she cried, her voice desperate now. "I was stupid, okay? I was selfish. I know I was wrong. But I never stopped loving you. I swear I didn't. I shook my head, feeling the cold anger settle in again. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied to me, sneaked around behind my back, destroyed everything we built together. You didn't love me, Emma. You loved yourself. She looked like I'd slapped her, her eyes wide with shock, her mouth hanging open as she tried to find the words to argue, to make me change my mind. But there was nothing left to say. You made your choice, I continued, my voice steady. And now I'm making mine. We're done. The words hung in the air between us, final and unchangeable. I could see the panic rising in her eyes, the desperation as she realized I wasn't bluffing. David, please, she whispered, reaching across the table for my hand. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. We can fix this. I'll make it right. I pulled my hand back before she could touch me. No, I said firmly. You don't get to make it right now. You had your chance, and you blew it. I'm not staying in a marriage built on lies. She stared at me, her face crumbling as the reality of it finally started to sink in. So that's it, she asked, her voice trembling. You're just leaving? I stood up, pushing my chair back. I'm leaving because you already left, Emma. You left the second you decided to sleep with him. I'm just finishing what you started. She sobbed, burying her face in her hands, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Not for her, but for what we'd lost. We'd had something once, something real, something worth fighting for. But she'd killed it. And now, there was nothing left to save. I'm going to pack my things, I said quietly. I'll be out by the end of the week. She didn't say anything, just kept crying, her shoulders shaking with every sob. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, heading upstairs to the bedroom we'd shared for years. It felt different now, smaller, colder. Like all the warmth had been drained out of it the second I found out the truth. I started packing my clothes into a suitcase, not bothering to fold anything neatly. I just wanted to get out. To leave this house, this marriage, this life behind. I didn't know where I was going yet, but anywhere was better than here. As I zipped up the suitcase, I glanced around the room one last time, my eyes landing on the framed photos on the dresser. Pictures of us on vacations, at weddings, at family gatherings. Smiling, happy, like we had everything figured out. Lies. Every single one of them. I picked up one of the frames, the one from our honeymoon, and stared at it for a moment. We looked so young, so in love, so full of hope for the future. It felt like I was looking at strangers. With a bitter laugh, I tossed the photo into the trash can and grabbed my suitcase. I didn't need any reminders of what we used to be. That life was over. As I walked down the stairs, I could still hear her crying in the kitchen, her sobs echoing through the house. Part of me wanted to feel something, some kind of sadness or regret. But all I felt was relief. I was free. Free from the lies, the deceit, the betrayal. I was done. I walked out the front door without looking back. I didn't know what was coming next. I didn't have a plan, didn't have a roadmap for what my life was going to look like now. But I knew one thing for sure, whatever was waiting for me on the other side of this mess, it couldn't be worse than what I was leaving behind. As I threw my suitcase into the back of the car and slammed the trunk shut, I felt a strange sense of peace. The kind that comes when you finally cut out the rot, when you finally walk away from something that's been poisoning you for too long. And for the first time in months, I drove away without the weight of Emma's betrayal hanging over me. This time, I wasn't running. I was moving forward. I spent the next few days holed up in a cheap motel, somewhere just outside town. It wasn't much, but it was quiet, and I needed quiet to think. The whole place smelled like bleach and stale cigarettes, but at least there was no one asking me questions, no one giving me those pitying looks, no one pretending they understood. I hadn't told anyone where I was. The only person I had to talk to was myself, and that was just fine. The texts from Emma kept coming in at first. Long, rambling messages about how sorry she was, how she wanted to fix things, how she still loved me. I didn't respond to any of them. I'd already said everything I needed to say. I wasn't going back, and she needed to accept that. Eventually, the texts slowed down. I guess she figured out that I wasn't going to play along anymore. A few people from our mutual circle tried reaching out too. Some of them were offering their sympathy, others just wanted the details, the gossip. I ignored them all. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I wasn't interested in explaining myself to anyone, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let them treat my life like some kind of reality show. I kept replaying that last conversation with Emma in my head. The way she'd looked at me, broken and desperate, pleading with me to stay, to give her another chance. I thought about her tears, the way her voice had cracked when she said she'd do anything to fix it. But none of it meant anything anymore. It was all too little, too late. She had already burned down everything that mattered, and I had no interest in sifting through the ashes. She kept calling for the first few days, and each time I just let it ring. After the third day, I finally blocked her number. I didn't want to hear her voice anymore. Didn't want to hear her excuses, her apologies, her promises that things would be different. Because they wouldn't be. And even if she changed, even if she was telling the truth now, it didn't matter. I was done. I kept to myself, going through the motions of packing up my life. It was mechanical. I boxed up my things from the house while she stayed somewhere else, and I made sure not to leave anything behind that she could cling to. No sentimental bullshit. No reminders of what we used to be. I wasn't interested in leaving her with anything she could use to pull me back in. The house felt like a stranger's now, anyway. I'd come in the mornings when I knew she wouldn't be there, just long enough to grab another box of clothes or books or whatever else I thought I'd need. I moved what I could to a storage unit, though I wasn't even sure I wanted most of it. It was just stuff. Things I didn't want to think about. Part of me wanted to toss everything, start fresh, but that was a problem for later. I had bigger things to deal with right now. It wasn't until a week after I left that I finally sat down with the divorce papers. I'd talked to the lawyer a couple of times, but I kept putting off signing. I knew it was inevitable. There wasn't a single part of me that wanted to stay married, but putting my name on those papers felt like the last nail in the coffin. Like I was burying the last 12 years of my life for good. But that's what it had come to. That's what Emma had done. And now I had to do what I should have done the second I caught her in that hotel room, end it. I called the lawyer, told her I was ready. We met at her office the next day, and I sat there in her overly neat, impersonal office while she went over the terms one last time. Most of it was straightforward. We didn't have kids to fight over, and the house was going to be sold anyway. What little we had left to divide would be split evenly, and I didn't care enough to haggle over any of it. I just wanted it over with. The lawyer slid the papers across the desk, and I picked up the pen. I stared down at the document for a moment, the words swimming in front of me. Irreconcilable differences. That's what it boiled down to in the end. Those cold, impersonal words. Like they could somehow sum up the destruction of a marriage in 3 simple lines of text. I signed my name at the bottom. One stroke of the pen, and it was done. I handed the papers back to the lawyer, and she nodded, giving me that sympathetic look people always give when they don't know what to say. I didn't need her sympathy. I didn't want it. I just wanted my life back. That's it, then? I asked, my voice sounding flat even to my own ears. She nodded. That's it. You'll get the final paperwork in a few weeks, but from here, it's just formalities. I nodded, stood up, and walked out without saying another word. I didn't feel anything, not really. No relief, no anger, no sadness. Just a kind of numbness that had settled in over the last few days, insulating me from everything. Maybe that was for the best. Maybe it was better not to feel too much right now. I took a long walk after leaving the lawyer's office. Just me in the quiet streets, no one to talk to, no one to explain myself to. The autumn air was cool, almost biting, but it helped clear my head. I needed to think about what came next. I needed to figure out who the hell I was without Emma, without the marriage I'd spent over a decade building. I thought about calling my brother. We hadn't been close for a while, mostly because I'd been so wrapped up in my life with Emma. He'd tried reaching out a few times after everything happened, but I hadn't picked up. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. I still wasn't, but I figured maybe it was time to start reconnecting with the people who actually gave a shit about me. As I walked, I found myself near the bar where my brother and I used to meet up for drinks after work, back when life was simpler. I stopped in front of the entrance, staring at the faded sign hanging above the door. Part of me wanted to go inside, have a drink, maybe forget about everything for a little while. But I wasn't ready to forget. I needed to remember. I needed to process what had happened, to deal with it head-on instead of burying it under whiskey and regret. I turned around and kept walking. By the time I got back to the motel, I decided what I needed to do. It was time to move on. Not just from Emma, but from everything. The house, the memories, the life I'd built that was now nothing but rubble. I couldn't stay in this town anymore. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of her, of what we used to be. I needed a fresh start. A clean break. The next morning, I called a real estate agent and put the house on the market. I didn't care about the price. I just wanted it gone. I wasn't going back there. I couldn't. I packed up what little I had left and made plans to leave town. I didn't have a destination in mind yet, but that didn't matter. Anywhere was better than here. A few days later, I got the email from my lawyer. The divorce was finalized. Emma and I were officially over. I stared at the email for a long time, trying to feel something. But there was nothing left to feel. The anger had burned itself out. The sadness had dulled into a faint ache that I barely noticed anymore. All that was left was the quiet certainty that I'd made the right choice. I wasn't leaving because I was running away. I was leaving because I needed to rebuild. I needed to find out who I was without her, without the marriage that had defined me for so long. I wasn't sure where I'd end up, but I knew I'd be okay. I drove past the house one last time before I left town. It looked the same as it always had, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. It hadn't for a long time. As I pulled onto the highway, the sun setting behind me, I felt a strange sense of calm. The road stretched out ahead of me, open and endless, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel trapped. I wasn't sure where I was going, but wherever it was better than where I'd been. This was the start of something new. Something real. Something mine. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready for it.